Emily had always believed that love could make any world beautiful. When she married Richard, she thought her dreams had finally come true. He was tall, confident, and successful, the kind of man everyone admired. His life sparkled with luxury, expensive cars, fine suits, and a mansion that looked like something from a movie. To Emily it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. She came from a modest background, a small-town girl who believed in hard work and kindness. Richard's world was so different, so polished, that she often felt like she had stepped onto a stage where everything had to be perfect. In the beginning, Richard was charming. He would surprise her with gifts, diamond necklaces, elegant dresses, dinners at the best restaurants in the city. He said she was beautiful, that he was lucky to have her. Emily tried to believe that this was love. But deep inside she sometimes felt uneasy. When they went to parties, she noticed how Richard loved the attention. He spoke loudly about his business, his cars, and his travels. Emily stood beside him, smiling while people praised him for his success. Sometimes, when she tried to join the conversation, Richard would interrupt her or change the topic, as if her words didn't matter. At first she thought she was just nervous. Maybe she needed time to fit in, to learn how to behave in his world. She tried to dress like the other women, elegant and confident. She practiced speaking with grace, reading about art and wine so she could sound more refined. But no matter what she did, she always felt like she was being quietly judged. Richard's friends came from wealthy families, and they often looked at her with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Richard started to make small remarks that stung. "You wouldn't understand business talk," he would say with a laugh when she asked about his work. Or, "You don't need to worry about money, just focus on keeping things nice at home." Emily would nod and stay quiet even though her heart ached. She had always been independent. Before marriage she had worked as a graphic designer and she loved her job. But Richard didn't like her working. He said it made him look bad if his wife had to earn her own money. At first, Emily agreed to take a break, thinking she could return to work later. But as months passed, she realized Richard didn't want her to go back. He wanted her to depend on him completely. He often reminded her of how much he spent on her clothes, her jewelry, their home. "You're lucky, Emily," he would say. "Most women would dream of a life like this." She would smile faintly, though inside she felt smaller every day. Their mansion was beautiful but cold. Everything looked perfect, yet Emily felt lonely in every room. Richard was always busy, meetings, events, and business trips. When he was home, he often scrolled through his phone or took calls during dinner. Emily tried to talk to him, but he rarely listened. "You worry too much," he would say whenever she told him how she felt. "You have everything you need. What more could you want?" Sometimes, Emily walked through the house just to remind herself she was real. She would stop by the window and look outside, remembering the small apartment she once lived in, a place filled with laughter, music, and the smell of fresh coffee. She missed that life. She missed being able to make her own choices. In Richard's world, everything had to be approved, arranged, or timed perfectly. Even her smile had to look right for photographs. One afternoon, while preparing for a dinner party Richard was hosting, Emily overheard him talking to a friend on the phone. He laughed and said, "Emily's sweet, but she'll never really fit into my circle. She's from a different world." His words cut through her like glass. She froze in the hallway, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, she realized he didn't see her as his equal. To him, she was an accessory, a pretty piece that made his life look complete. At the dinner that evening, Emily wore her most elegant dress and greeted every guest with grace. No one saw the storm inside her. She smiled, poured wine, and played the perfect hostess. But when Richard proudly told the guests about his latest deal, she caught his eye. He looked at her the way someone might look at a trophy, something to show off, not someone to understand. That night, after everyone left, Emily sat alone on the balcony. The city lights shimmered below, but they no longer looked magical. She thought about the life she had imagined, one filled with love, laughter, and partnership. What she had instead was a glittering cage. It sparkled from the outside, but inside it was silent and cold. She wondered when she had lost herself. Was it when she stopped working? When she stopped speaking up? When she started believing she wasn't good enough? Each question echoed quietly in her heart. She knew she had tried her best to make things work, but love could not survive without respect. Richard walked out onto the balcony, still on his phone, barely noticing her. "Don't wait up," he said without looking at her. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Then he went back inside. Emily watched him go and felt something shift inside her. She realized she didn't want to live a life where she had to shrink to make someone else shine. The night breeze brushed her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of freedom. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. A life built not on wealth or status but on her own strength. The mansion behind her still glowed with golden lights, but Emily knew that no amount of gold could hide the emptiness inside. She didn't know what her next step would be, but she knew she couldn't keep living like this. She had once believed that love made her part of Richard's world. Now she understood that love wasn't supposed to make her feel small. It was supposed to make her grow. And somewhere deep in her heart, a quiet voice whispered that her story wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The evening began like any other. Emily had spent the whole day preparing for Richard's dinner party. The house was spotless, the table set with crystal glasses and shining silverware. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress, one that Richard had approved earlier in the day. He liked her to look graceful but not too loud, as he often said. Emily brushed her hair carefully, trying to calm her nerves. Dinner parties always made her uneasy. Richard loved these events, being surrounded by his wealthy friends, laughing loudly, showing off his success. For him it was a stage. For Emily it was a performance she had to survive. Still, she told herself to stay calm, to smile, to play the part of the perfect wife one more time. As the guests arrived, laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the grand dining room. The air smelled of expensive wine and roasted lamb. Emily greeted each guest warmly, carrying herself with quiet grace. Most of them knew her only as Richard's wife. They complimented her dress, her home, and her hosting skills, but no one ever asked about her thoughts or dreams. When everyone was seated, Richard began talking about his latest business deal. He spoke with pride about his company's success, about the profits, and about the awards he'd recently received. Emily listened quietly, smiling when he looked her way. But then one of his friends, a man named James, leaned forward with a teasing grin. "So, Emily," he said, "you must have come from quite a simple background, right? Richard said you weren't used to all this luxury." There was a soft laugh around the table. Emily felt her heart skip. She looked at Richard, hoping he would correct his friend, maybe say something kind. But instead he laughed too. "Oh yes," Richard said, grinning. "Emily didn't even know which fork to use when we first met. She's come a long way though. I've taught her a lot." The table burst into laughter. Emily froze. Her cheeks burned, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The laughter sounded loud and sharp, echoing in her ears. She forced a small smile, pretending it didn't hurt, but inside her heart cracked. Richard kept talking, enjoying the attention, not realizing, or not caring, how deeply his words had cut her. For the rest of the evening, Emily said very little. She passed dishes, poured wine, and smiled when expected, but her mind was far away. She thought of her childhood home, the tiny house with the creaky wooden floor and the smell of her mother's cooking. It had been simple, yes, but it had been full of love. There, no one had ever made her feel small. When the guests finally left, Richard seemed pleased. "It was a great evening," he said, loosening his tie. "You did well tonight. Everyone loves you." Emily looked at him, her voice quiet. "Did you have to say that about me? About my background?" Richard frowned. "Oh, come on, Emily. It was just a joke. Don't take things so seriously." "It didn't feel like a joke," she said softly. He sighed, pouring himself another drink. "You're too sensitive. That's your problem. Learn to take a little teasing." She didn't reply. She watched him sip his drink and scroll through his phone as if nothing had happened. The man she once admired now looked like a stranger. Something inside her began to shift, a small but strong voice whispering that this couldn't be her life forever. Later that night, after Richard went to bed, Emily walked out onto the balcony. The city lights glittered below, but she felt no connection to them. She leaned on the railing and let the cool night air touch her face. Her eyes filled with tears she had been holding back all evening. She thought of the woman she used to be before marriage, the one who had dreams, who loved her work, who believed she could do anything. That woman felt far away now, hidden behind the silence and fear that had slowly crept into her heart. Emily realized she had spent years trying to fit into Richard's world, trying to earn his approval, trying not to make mistakes. But what had it given her? Loneliness. A sense that she had become invisible even in her own life. She stood there for a long time, her thoughts racing. She remembered her first job at a small design company, how proud she had felt when her first poster was displayed in a store window. She remembered her friends, her laughter, her small but cozy apartment. She missed that girl, the one who believed she could stand on her own. As the night grew quiet, she whispered to herself, "No more." The words were soft but powerful. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid to think it. She was tired of being careful, tired of being someone else's reflection. She wanted to feel alive again. In the following days, Emily became quiet but thoughtful. Richard didn't notice. He was too busy with meetings and phone calls. When he spoke to her, it was about his business or upcoming events. She nodded and listened, but inside she was planning. She started reading again, books about art, design, and business. She went for walks in the park near their home, breathing in the fresh air, reminding herself what freedom felt like. She even reached out to an old colleague asking how the design world had changed. The conversation brought back memories of who she used to be. One afternoon, while Richard was out of town, Emily opened her laptop and began sketching designs again. Her hands trembled at first, but soon she lost herself in the work. Hours passed without her noticing. When she finished, she stared at the screen and smiled for the first time in months. It was a small thing, a spark of creativity, but it made her feel strong again. It reminded her that she didn't need anyone's permission to dream. That night, she looked around the grand house and realized how empty it felt. The gold frames, the marble floors, the chandeliers, none of it brought happiness. It was all a shell, beautiful but hollow. She didn't belong to this world of constant showing off and hidden cruelty. Emily didn't know exactly what her next step would be, but she knew she couldn't keep living under Richard's shadow. She wanted to build a life that was hers, simple, honest, and free. When Richard returned the next day, she greeted him politely, but something had changed in her eyes. He didn't notice, of course. He never did. But Emily knew that night at the dinner table had marked the end of something inside her. The end of her silence, the end of her pretending. She had been humiliated in front of everyone, but that pain had awakened something powerful. It had reminded her that she was more than a wife in a golden cage. She was a person with dreams, with talent, with strength. And as she stood by the window watching the morning sun rise, she made herself a quiet promise. She would build a life that no one could take away. A life that didn't depend on Richard's approval or anyone else's. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she believed she could do it. The light touched her face and she felt a strange sense of peace. She didn't need Richard's world anymore. She was ready to create her own. The morning Emily left Richard's house, the sky was gray and quiet. She packed her suitcase slowly, taking only what she truly needed. Her laptop, a few clothes, her sketchbooks, and a small photo of her parents. Each sound, each zip of the suitcase, echoed through the grand but lonely house. Richard was away on a business trip. He didn't know she was leaving. For once, Emily didn't leave a note. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. She stepped outside, looked up at the tall gates that had once made her feel safe, and realized they had only trapped her. The driver who came to pick her up gave her a polite nod. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "Anywhere but here," she said softly. A few hours later, she stood in front of a small apartment on the edge of the city. It was nothing like the mansion she had lived in. The walls were plain, the floor a little scratched, and the kitchen barely big enough for two people. But when she opened the window and felt the wind on her face, she smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. For the first few days, the silence felt strange. There was no sound of servants walking through the hallways, no expensive perfume filling the air. Just her and her thoughts. Sometimes she cried. Not because she missed Richard, but because she was scared. She had no job, no plan, and little money saved. Yet, for the first time in years, she also felt something she hadn't felt before: freedom. Emily had always loved design. Colors, patterns, and art had been her world before marriage. So one morning, she decided to take the first real step toward a new life. She opened her laptop, made a list of supplies, and used her savings to rent a small office space in an old building downtown. It wasn't fancy, just a single room with cracked walls and a flickering light, but when she placed her sketchbooks on the desk, it felt like a dream coming back to life. She called it Blue Leaf Studio. The name came from a drawing she had made years ago, a single blue leaf floating in the wind. To her, it meant change, courage, and beauty in simplicity. Starting out was hard. She had no connections, no big clients, and no one to guide her. The first few weeks were full of rejection. She sent out emails, posted her designs online, and handed out flyers, but few people responded. Still, she refused to give up. Each night, she worked late, sketching ideas, building her portfolio, and improving her designs. One afternoon, a small cafe owner named Claire walked into the studio. She needed someone to design a new logo and menu for her shop. "It's not much," Claire said shyly, "but I love your style." Emily smiled. "It's more than enough. Thank you for trusting me." That project became her first success. She worked day and night, pouring her heart into every detail. When she delivered the final design, Claire was thrilled. She told everyone she knew about Emily's work. Slowly, one project led to another. Soon, a local bookstore asked Emily to design their new posters. Then, a small clothing brand reached out for help with their packaging. Her designs stood out because they were honest and warm, unlike the cold, polished look most businesses went for. People said her work felt human. Each time a client thanked her, Emily's confidence grew. She began to believe in herself again. She learned how to manage finances, talk to clients, and make decisions without asking for anyone's permission. It wasn't easy. Some nights she barely slept, worrying about bills or deadlines, but she kept going. One day while walking to work, Emily passed a store window and stopped. Her design, the logo she had created for the cafe, was displayed on a signboard. Customers were laughing inside, enjoying their drinks under her artwork. She stood there for a long moment, smiling. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself, not because someone approved of her but because she had built something real. As months turned into a year, Blue Leaf Studio began to grow. Emily hired a young assistant named Daniel, a kind and talented artist who shared her passion. Together, they created designs for local businesses, charities, and schools. They didn't earn a fortune, but each project brought joy and purpose. Emily's small studio became a place filled with creativity and laughter. The walls, once cracked and dull, were now covered with colorful sketches and inspirational quotes. She painted one sentence near the door that said, "Start small but start anyway." It reminded her of how far she had come. There were still moments of doubt. Some nights, Emily lay awake, wondering if she had made the right choice. Sometimes, when she saw news about Richard's company in magazines or online, she felt a faint sting of memory. He was still rich, still powerful. But then she would look around her tiny office, filled with sketches, plants, and smiling faces, and realize she wouldn't trade her life for his anymore. One afternoon, she received an email from a large eco-friendly company interested in working with her. They had seen her designs online and loved her natural, heartfelt style. It was her biggest opportunity yet. Nervous but excited, Emily prepared a presentation. She stayed up late for days perfecting every slide. When she finally met the company's director, he said, "Your work feels alive, Emily. It tells stories. That's what we're looking for." When she left the meeting, she could hardly believe it. She had just signed her first major contract. Standing outside the office building, she looked up at the sky and felt tears of happiness roll down her cheeks. It wasn't about fame or money, it was about proving to herself that she could stand on her own. That evening, she returned to her small apartment. It was still simple, but now it felt warm and alive. On the table lay her sketchbooks and the same small photo of her parents. She picked it up and whispered, "I did it." She cooked a small meal and sat by the window watching the city lights. The same lights that once felt cold now seemed gentle, almost welcoming. She realized that success didn't always mean having the biggest house or the most money. Sometimes it meant waking up excited for the day ahead. It meant being proud of who you were. When Emily thought back to her life with Richard, it felt like a distant memory, another world entirely. He had once told her she would never match his status, that she would always live in his shadow. Now she understood that his kind of status meant nothing without peace or self-worth. She had built her life from nothing, piece by piece, like a painting slowly coming to life. The colors weren't perfect, but they were hers. Each brushstroke, each struggle, each small success told a story of courage. As she turned off the lights that night, she smiled to herself. The woman who once felt lost and powerless had found her way back. The fear that had once held her captive was gone. She had taken her first step, and it had changed everything. 3 years passed, and the little studio that had once been just Emily's dream had turned into something far greater than she had ever imagined. Blue Leaf Studio was no longer a single small room with cracked walls. It was now a bright, lively space in the heart of the city. The walls were decorated with her team's artwork, and the smell of fresh coffee and paint filled the air every morning. Emily arrived early each day, her steps light and confident. The team she had built had grown from just her and Daniel to a group of 8 talented people. They came from different places and backgrounds, all sharing one goal, to create designs that told real stories. Emily made sure her studio felt like a family, not a company. Everyone had a voice and every idea mattered. Clients loved working with her. She had a way of listening that made people feel seen. She didn't just design logos or posters, she captured feelings. Her art was simple but full of warmth. Companies that once ignored her now waited for months to get a meeting. Yet even with all the success, Emily stayed humble. She still remembered the fear of those first days, sitting alone in a tiny room, wondering if anyone would ever notice her work. Her first big project with the eco-friendly brand had changed everything. The campaign went viral and people praised its beauty and honesty. That one job opened doors to bigger opportunities. Soon, she was invited to design for well-known organizations, travel for creative workshops, and speak at design events in other cities. Each trip brought new people, new ideas, and a growing sense of who she truly was. Emily loved traveling. She visited small art galleries, met local artists, and spent evenings sketching in cafes while watching the world pass by. Each city left a mark on her heart: Paris with its quiet streets, Rome with its colors, and Kyoto with its peace. She collected stories everywhere she went, and they became part of her designs. During one of her trips, she met an older woman named Margaret, a painter who lived in a small town by the sea. They talked for hours about art, love, and life. Margaret told her, "Success isn't about being seen by everyone. It's about looking at yourself and liking what you see." Those words stayed with Emily. Back at her studio, Emily began creating a new collection, one that wasn't for a client but for herself. She called it Roots. Each piece represented a part of her journey: her childhood home, her first sketchbook, her heartbreak, and her rebirth. When she held her first public exhibition, the room was filled with people who had followed her story. Some had known her since her early days, others had only seen her work online, but they all came to see how art could grow from pain and courage. As she walked through the gallery that night, Emily felt something deep inside her, a quiet pride, not loud or showy but peaceful. She realized she didn't just have a career now, she had built a life that reflected her heart. She had more money than before, yes, but she didn't spend it on luxury. Instead, she supported small artists, funded creative programs for young students, and donated to women's shelters. She knew what it felt like to feel trapped, powerless, and unseen. Helping others rise became her greatest joy. Sometimes people asked her if she had any regrets. Emily always smiled softly and said, "No. Every mistake, every tear, every failure led me here." One afternoon, she received an invitation to speak at an international art and business summit. It was a big event filled with powerful people, CEOs, designers, and leaders from around the world. Standing on that stage was something she had never imagined for herself years ago. When she stepped up to the microphone, the large hall went silent. She looked at the crowd and began, "A few years ago, I thought success meant having everything that shines. But I learned that real success is quiet. It's waking up in peace, doing what you love, and respecting yourself. It's not about status, it's about purpose." Her speech received a standing ovation. Afterward, people came up to her, telling her how her story had inspired them. Some even said they were ready to start over in their own lives. Emily smiled at each of them, humbled and grateful. Later that evening, as she walked along the river near the event hall, she thought about how far she had come. The same woman who once stood crying on a balcony, feeling trapped and invisible, was now walking freely under the open sky. The world no longer felt cold, it felt full of possibilities. Back in her apartment, Emily had kept one item from her old life, a small glass vase Richard had once bought her. She didn't keep it because it reminded her of him, but because it reminded her of who she used to be, the woman who once believed she needed someone else to feel complete. Now that vase held fresh flowers every week, a symbol of how something simple could still be beautiful. One weekend, Emily decided to visit her old hometown. She walked through the familiar streets, the small shops, and the park where she used to sketch as a teenager. Some people recognized her from local news stories about her success. They congratulated her, proud that someone from their town had made it big. Emily smiled and said, "It's good to be home." She visited her parents' grave and placed a single blue flower there. "You told me to be brave," she whispered. "And I finally am." When she returned to the city, her studio team surprised her with a small celebration. They had made a banner that read, "To the woman who taught us that courage creates beauty." Emily laughed and hugged each of them. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of happiness. She realized that her life now had meaning beyond design. It was about connection, kindness, and growth. She no longer measured success by what she owned but by how she lived. Every day she woke up thankful, ready to create something new, not just art but moments of joy. As night fell, Emily stood by the window of her studio, looking out at the glowing city. The lights shimmered like stars, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was chasing them. She was part of them. She had once thought freedom was just about leaving someone, but now she understood, it was about finding herself. Her heart was full, her spirit calm, and her life truly her own. It had been almost 10 years since Emily walked out of Richard's house for the last time. Her life had changed completely since then. The small studio she started with nothing but courage had grown into one of the most loved creative companies in the country. She had a team she trusted, friends who felt like family, and a life filled with peace and purpose. That evening, Emily was getting ready for a charity gala in the city. It was an event to raise funds for young artists, a cause close to her heart. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple silver bracelet on her wrist. It wasn't expensive, but it was special. It had been a gift from one of her students who said Emily had changed her life. Her dress was elegant but modest, a soft shade of blue that matched the name of her studio, Blue Leaf. She no longer dressed to impress anyone, she dressed in what made her feel comfortable and confident. As she arrived at the grand hall, the flashes of cameras lit up the entrance. Reporters greeted her by name, asking questions about her upcoming projects and her foundation. Emily smiled warmly, answering with calm grace. Inside, the gala was beautiful, golden chandeliers, music playing softly, and people in sparkling outfits. Emily walked through the crowd, greeting familiar faces. Many guests admired her not just for her success but for her kindness. She had built a reputation for being both talented and humble, something rare in her industry. While talking with a group of young artists, Emily suddenly felt someone watching her. She turned slightly and there he was. Richard. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. He stood across the room holding a glass of wine, his expression frozen in surprise. Time had changed him. His hair was thinner, his face sharper, his smile practiced but tired. He wore the same kind of expensive suit she remembered, but there was something missing, something hollow behind his eyes. Emily's heart didn't race and her hands didn't shake. She simply felt still. It had been years since she had even thought about him, and now, seeing him again, she realized how far she had come, not just in life but in peace. Richard hesitated, then began to walk toward her. The crowd seemed to part naturally, leaving a quiet space between them. When he reached her, he spoke softly. Emily. It's been a long time. She smiled politely. It has. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes scanning her face as if trying to recognize the woman he once knew. You look different, he said finally. Maybe I am, she replied, her tone gentle but sure. Richard glanced around, noticing how people greeted Emily with respect, how the event organizers spoke to her with admiration. I've heard about your company, he said. Blue Leaf, right? It's impressive. Thank you, she said simply. We've worked hard. He nodded slowly. You've done well for yourself. I didn't expect. His voice trailed off, unsure how to finish. Emily tilted her head slightly. Didn't expect me to make it without you? Richard gave a small, uneasy smile. Something like that. She didn't feel angry anymore. The woman she had once been, the one who cried alone in that mansion, was gone. Standing before him now was someone entirely new. Well, she said softly, sometimes losing what you think you need helps you find what you truly are. For a second, Richard didn't respond. He looked down as if thinking of the past. I was wrong about many things, he admitted. You were always stronger than I realized. Emily's eyes softened. Maybe we both learned something, she said kindly. Just then, a photographer called her name from across the room. Cameras flashed as she smiled naturally, standing beside other guests. Richard stepped aside, watching silently as people surrounded her. For the first time, the light wasn't on him, it was on her. He suddenly looked smaller than she remembered. Not because of his height or his wealth, but because the power he once held over her no longer existed. She was free. When the photos were done, Emily turned back to him. It was nice seeing you, Richard. I hope you're doing well. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. You too, Emily. With a gentle smile, she walked away. As she moved through the crowd, she was stopped by a young designer who nervously handed her a small folder. Miss Parker, the girl said, your story inspires me. I want to start my own studio one day. Emily smiled warmly, remembering when she had once stood in the same position. You will, she said. Just believe in yourself, and start even if it's small. The girl's eyes shone with hope. Emily placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before heading toward the balcony for some air. Outside, the night was calm. The city lights glittered below like stars on the ground. Emily leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool air. Behind her, she could still hear laughter and music from the gala, but out here, everything felt peaceful. She thought about the path she had taken, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty. Every moment that once felt like an ending had led her to this point. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was hers. She didn't have to prove herself to anyone anymore. Not to Richard, not to society, not even to her past self. She had built a world of her own, one filled with purpose, creativity, and kindness. A soft breeze lifted her hair and she smiled to herself. For so long she had chased the idea of happiness in the form of luxury, thinking it was something she could find in someone else's world. Now she understood that happiness wasn't a place, it was a peace inside her heart. As the evening went on, she returned inside to join her team at their table. They laughed, shared stories, and made plans for their next community project. Emily listened to them, feeling proud. These people weren't just colleagues, they were the family she had chosen. Later that night, when the gala ended, Emily stepped outside once more. The crowd had thinned and cars lined up under the golden lights. As she waited for her driver, she noticed Richard again in the distance. He was alone, talking to no one, his phone in his hand, his face turned down. For a brief second she almost felt sorry for him, not out of pity but because she finally understood. He had everything she once thought she wanted: money, power, recognition, but he looked lost. She, on the other hand, had everything she truly needed: peace, purpose, and freedom. As her car pulled up, she gave one last look at the ballroom behind her. Then she smiled, stepped in, and closed the door. The city lights reflected in the window as the car drove away, and Emily leaned back, feeling content. She thought of the young woman she had once been, standing scared and uncertain in front of a future she couldn't imagine. That woman had believed she was small. But now she knew better. She had built herself from the ground up, not through wealth or reputation but through courage, honesty, and love. The road ahead was still open, full of new beginnings. But wherever it led, she would walk it as herself, strong, calm, and free. And as the car disappeared into the night, Emily smiled quietly, knowing she had done something far greater than matching Richard's status. She had outgrown it. She had created a life beyond luxury, a life entirely her own.